Hello, Internet, and welcome to the Homebrew Studio. My name is Matthew. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm going to be here in the studio for the next hour or so with you today as we talk about creating homebrew content that you can use in your role-playing games with your friends. Thanks so much for joining me today. With me, as before, is Logan, one of our Nerdsmith directors and the arbiter of the live stream. Logan, say hello to the nice people in chat with us today. And speaking of, I see we have Mr. Blinks. Mr. Blinks, thank you for resubscribing to the Twitch channel. We do greatly appreciate it. I apologize if you hear my cats running around in the background. They have a case of the zoomies. But that's fine. So, quickly before we get into the studio, I want to say thank you again to everyone who showed up to support this show and the Nerdsmith Network during our sub drive last month. We appreciate all of your support, and those of you who were able to throw a few bucks our way to help us continue to do what we love, which is bring you this great free nerdy content. Thank you so much. If you missed the sub drive and still want to support us, you can do so by going over to nerdsmith.org, clicking the support tab, the support link, and subbing at any of the tiers. You can also support us through Twitch or Twitch Prime subscription. Zama kitties? I don't know what you're talking about, Logan, but that's fine. Oh, Zoom. I think you mean Zoomy kitties. I thought you meant zombie kitties, which is an idea. We'll leave it at that. But getting into our actual topic for today, I want to talk about culture and diversity in role-playing games and how homebrew can make some meaningful headway in terms of making our games more accessible and more respectful and more inviting to players, as well as audiences if you happen to be playing in some sort of public arena. Now, this is a topic I've been kind of stewing on for the past week, and I don't have a lot of material prepared, so I think this is going to be more of a discussion session in the studio today, where we just sort of brainstorm ideas and discuss, rather than the kind of item or creature creation that we've done in the past. So, without getting into the inciting incident too much, I was reminded of how certain cultural stereotypes are coded into our fantasy media, and some of these stereotypes I find quite objectionable, particularly when they're linked with creatures that are predominantly or explicitly portrayed as evil. I thought about going off on a bit of a tangent, but after giving it some thought, I've decided I'm not going to do that today, because first of all, Homebrew Studio is not my soapbox to preach angrily at the internet, and secondly, as a white cis male person, there are certain topics where my input is not as helpful. So while I want to revisit this topic in the future, because I think it's important, especially in today's era where the RPG community is pushing against these boundaries and trying to be more inclusive and conscious of these social issues, I want to come back in the future with some guest GMs who can give their perspective, a perspective outside my own, and bring their experience and their opinions to the table. So while I think there is a lot that can be done, particularly in terms of negative racial stereotypes and a lot of baggage surrounding that topic, I recognize that my voice is not the one that really needs to be heard right now. There are millions of cisgendered white men out there airing their opinions on the internet. We need other voices in the conversation. So hopefully in at some point this year, I will get some guest GMs on to discuss this matter more and get their opinions and their perspective on the issue. So for today, I'm going to narrow our focus down to a topic I do feel comfortable addressing, and that is queer identity and sexuality in role-playing games. For the sake of transparency, I myself identify as a gay or queer allosexual. I am cis male. My husband is cis male. I hope one day to have a trans or non-binary GM join me as well, so we can have their point of view on the topic. But for today, I'm going to do my best to represent my community at large. So I'm going to drop a link in chat Logan, you might have to approve this for me because I'm not sure if I'll have permission. Um, just a moment here. But this is an article by Christine Previs, who is a non-binary gendered person and the dungeon master for an actual play podcast called The Unexplored Places. And in their article, Christine is talking about one of the major issues that still exists in D&D, and I think this extends to tabletop RPGs at large that were created more than a decade ago, which is to say most tabletop RPGs. And that is the lack of sensitivity or awareness to queer identities. Specifically, Christine in this article writes about the infamous D&D module, The Tomb of Horrors, which Gary Gygax, the creator of Dungeons and Dragons, or one of the creators, the sort of main author of Dungeons and Dragons, wrote in 1975. And sorry, I should have had this link readily available. There we go. I just put it in chat. So in this article, Christine talks about one of the many devious and usually deadly traps to be found in the Tomb of Horrors, which specifically there is one room that will instantly change a player character's biological sex to what the text refers to as its opposite. Now, there are many things wrong here, most of which can be chalked up to the scientific and cultural ignorances of 1975 America. But where it gets troubling is that this part of the module was not changed by Wizards of the Coast when they republished The Tomb of Horrors as part of Tales from the Yawning Portal in 2017. Now, by 2017, certainly a large portion of the game's audience knew better, a large portion of the tabletop RPG community knew better, and Wizards of the Coast really should have known as well. For one thing, we now know that there are 6 biological sexes based on DNA, and many times that number of genders. So to say opposite sex or opposite gender is really kind of nonsense. I'm not going to linger on this point too much. I strongly urge you to read through Christine's article to understand how it affected them and their sense of belonging in the tabletop RPG community, and get a sense of why this is an important issue, especially if we are trying to build a diverse and long-lasting community to share these games with. Far too much of what is being put out publicly in regards to tabletop RPGs involves cis-hetero players going on adventures in worlds where cisgendered heterosexuality is just the across-the-board norm. We need to move away from this. We need to be creating worlds and stories and characters that embrace a spectrum of gender and sexuality, not only those that we observe in humans, but that go beyond that to even more fantastic realms. And that is where we as homebrew creators can bring our creativity to bear, to create these worlds and this greater sense of diversity. Now, I will say, to Wizards' credit, in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, which came out last year, Wizards of the Coast included a footnote that addressed one of the elven gods, who is portrayed in the lore as being capable of changing their sex and gender at will, which is actually kind of common in older mythologies. But from this god, Wizards of the Coast noted that a small number of elves also have the ability to change their sex at will. It's a small step, but it's heading in the right direction. So, let's move on from my preamble here. Excuse me. Let's move on and start the actual work of discussing how we as dungeon masters game masters and storytellers can create more inclusive and positive spaces for our games. So, if we're discussing culture and diversity, how can we make our games more inclusive and positive in terms of queer identity and sexuality? And I use the term queer to mean LGBTQ plus and so forth. Logan says, I made this mistake in a game. It was my first step into the larger understanding of gender knowledge. And that's important. We make mistakes. We are human. We all have errors. The important thing is the lessons we learn from them and what we do moving forward to try and correct them. So, thank you, Logan. So, how can we make our games more inclusive and positive? Well, the first step I'm just going to throw out here seems obvious, but it's one I hardly ever see. Make queer NPCs! Exclamation point, exclamation point. If you want to foster a sense of diversity in the world, create diverse characters for your players to interact with. It's such a simple thing you can do. And I'm going to actually amend this. Make lots of queer NPCs. Because if you have one queer NPC in an entire world that your characters are going to be interacting with hundreds upon hundreds of NPCs, it's still not really representation. Make it visible, make it common, make it understood that this is just part of who people are, because that's the truth of it. So, make lots of queer NPCs, put them in your world, and I guess the second step is avoid stereotypes, parentheses, most of the time. Now, certain stereotypes are very much negative and are used and preserved because they denigrate or they belittle a group of people. Some stereotypes are kind of based in truth. So, for example, if you are, as I have been from time to time, a fan of the program Queer Eye, or Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, there are some very stereotypical gay men who are part of that program, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being a stereotypical gay man. Being sort of very traditionally effeminate and having sort of a nasal voice and saying things like girlfriend and that sort of stuff. That's fine. You just have to make sure you're not doing it as a means to a joke. You can portray a character who has some queer stereotypes. Just make sure you're doing it in a way that does not undermine their personal dignity. That's the caveat. Logan, are we still doing a World Anvil subscription, or is Nightbot being naughty? Nightbot is being naughty. Okay. Sorry, ignore that, folks. I guess the next point we want to use here is make diverse queer NPCs. And when we say diverse, what do we mean? We mean, excuse me while I adjust the formatting slightly because Google Docs is ridiculous. Talking about racially diverse. We're talking religious diversity. We're talking queer diversity in and of itself. If all of your queer characters are cisgendered uh, gay men or lesbians, you're not really showing diversity in your game. That's a very, very narrow view of queer identity. So when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about lesbians, oops, oops, gay men, bisexuals, transgendered persons, transsexual persons, non-binary persons, pansexual persons, demisexual persons. Let me scroll up here because I'm running out of window space. Asexual persons, and the list goes on. It's not enough just to have standard cisgendered same-sex couples in your game and think that that is representing queer diversity. There is an expansive list of non-heteronormative sexual expressions and genders, all of which are important, all of which are valid, and all of which deserve representation. So, something to keep in mind when we're talking about this subject. We're not just talking about having two men in a relationship, or, a male NPC flirting with one of your male player characters. It's an entire rainbow, an entire spectrum of queer identity and queer experience that you're trying to fold into your game to make it more inclusive, more representative, and more welcoming. And feel free, those of you who are in chat and anyone who is joining us, offer suggestions. What are ideas you think we can use, we can include in our homebrew world and our homebrew characters to foster this sense of diversity? So, well, let me think. Here's one for you. Represent queerness across social strata. What I mean by that is make sure that you're not just... how to put this? That you're representing queer people, not just among the merchant class, the lower classes, but in the places of power as well. Have queer kings and empresses and monarchs. Have them in places all throughout the social spectrum. That's another form of diversity that needs to be represented. Give them the opportunity to... give your players the opportunity to interact with these... with queer characters, not just at the sort of the street level, but in the places of power in your world as well. Let's see. Something we haven't put in the list yet, I'm noticing, but it bears mentioning. Just be respectful. Be respectful of queer identities and queer people. Never let the fact that someone is queer become a joke. That's not funny. That's not a punchline. That's just an aspect of who they are as a person. It goes kind of back to what I was saying before. It's okay to use stereotypes. Just never use stereotypes that are meant to make somebody a joke or a punchline. Never allow yourself to go for that easy laugh, because there are people who will see that, who do identify with that kind of, that personal sexuality or gender identity, and that's going to hurt them. That's going to push them away. That's going to tell them that this game, this place, this space that is your table isn't for them. And that's not what you want. So, let's see. What are some other ideas we can come up with? We are making our games more inclusive and positive in terms of queer identity and sexuality. Here's one. If you have a player who comes to you and wants to play a queer character, support them. Be supportive. Never tell them that they can't do that. And if you have concerns that some of the other players might not take it seriously, might not be respectful, that's not a reason for someone not to play a queer character. That's a reason for you to go to the people who aren't going to be respectful or take it seriously and have a conversation with them about how they need to change their attitude. Never let prevailing, poor attitudes stop your table from being more diverse and more representative. And there's, volumes upon volumes that have been said and written about how to deal with problematic players. I don't know that we're going to go into that too much during this particular stream, but it's inevitably going to be an issue that comes up, especially with a topic kind of like this, where there is so much cultural ignorance and prejudice surrounding it. Yes, Logan, do not let players discriminate against a player's choice. You never know as a GM if one of your players is closeted, if they are queer, if they are of a different gender expression than they present as, if they are struggling and trying to come to terms with that identity, and they're using this character and this format of fantasy roleplay to explore this idea. So be respectful of that. Make your play space a safe space. Because if you don't, there's always that chance that you're going to just directly offend someone and turn them away from this game, and that is the opposite of what we are trying to do as dungeon masters, as game masters and storytellers. Tessa, I want to make sure that I represent queer characters openly in my upcoming game, including a trans NPC that I'm developing. I want to avoid the J.K. Rowling effect. How can I, as a cis woman, be open about an NPC's trans identity without it coming across as pandering? Also, interracial queer relationships. Thank you, Tessa. Put that in as a bullet point under here. Interracial relationships. Very important. So is spelling. Thank you, Tessa. It's good to know you pulled over to type that out. Thank you for being safe. And Logan has a sort of a caveat to that. I have few queer NPCs, but sometimes I worry it comes across as pandering. Pandering is a really stupid concept. If you are being genuine in your intention, that's what's important. I think we're out of the spoiler window for Avengers Endgame. I'm still going to be I'm still going to avoid plot related things, but there's a scene in that movie which got some controversy because it's lined up all of the female superheroes and heroic characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for this one really amazing scene. And afterwards, and a lot of the media I was looking at, a lot of people were saying that was very pandering. That was Marvel being pandering to women. And I noticed something interesting. Every single person who called that scene pandering was male. Every female person that I've seen or heard or read reactions from loved it. They loved seeing that representation. So I think pandering is kind of a non-issue. Uh, I won't say non-issue. It's not as big of a concern as I think people make it out to be. Because we want to see ourselves represented in media. And so long as it's being done in a respectful way, in a way that makes us feel welcome and invited and part of the story and the experience, that's not pandering. That's showing that you take us seriously and that you want us to be part of the experience. So, going back to Tessa's point though, how can I as a cis woman be open about an NPC's trans identity without coming across as pandering? This is tricky, and this is an issue where I wish I had a trans or non-binary person here to bounce ideas off of, because I don't have a strong answer for this one. Like I said, I identify as cis male. I do not have the experience of being trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming. So I don't have a strong answer for this. The best answer that I can think of would be, and I will run this past some of my trans colleagues and some of the fantastic members of the Nerdsmith community we have who are trans. But my instinct would be to say, don't make it. See, now we're in a double-edged sword territory, because if you don't make it obvious, then how are you still representing that person as being trans? That's one I don't have an answer for. That's one I'm going to have to ask someone who has more experience in that than I do. Yeah. Sorry that I can't help you, Tessa. Unfortunately, that's just one question that I'm not the right person to ask. So, what are some other ideas we can brainstorm here about how to create a more inclusive and positive atmosphere? And how we can use homebrew world building to create that atmosphere? Well, let's see. If we want to move away from just talking about NPCs, let's talk about culture. Let's take it up a step. Let's go from talking about individual characters to cultures at large, and how we can build inclusivity and diversity into them as part of the same exercise. I think sort of the first point, again, it's kind of a given, but it's a jumping off place, is depict social cultures as being explicitly accepting of queer identities. And that's important. Depict that same-sex marriages are commonplace. That when people talk about romance or marriage, that they're doing so with not just the heteronormative understanding of, oh, you are a young man, you're going to grow up, you're going to marry a woman, but that there's more of an array of options beyond that. We can even get into discussing, this is almost an entire topic in and of itself, but different cultural conceptions of marriage or pair bonding or that kind of social institution, which is important. Don't get me wrong. But exploring different ways that can be expressed and different ways that can affect relationships and our cultural conceptions of relationships. That's a topic for another time, though. I don't want to get too distracted. Maybe depict the importance of queerness to a particular religion. I just mentioned a little bit ago about Corellon, who's one of the members of the Elven Pantheon. I think it's the leader of the Elven Pantheon in Dungeons and Dragons, who is a gender and sex fluid individual, and how that fundamentally queer aspect of that god or that deity informs on the religion itself. There's a jumping off point if you want to create a homebrew religion. Think about how you can inject queer identity or the importance of queer figures. There are a number of important people that go into making up a religion. Prophets, messiahs, popes, so forth. Think about how weaving in queer identity and queer individuals can create an interesting religious experience. I guess the sort of the practices and beliefs of the religion, how those can be affected by embracing queerness and queer identity. Yes, Tessa has a very good point. Use gender-neutral pronouns in common descriptions. That's very, very important. Remember to sprinkle in those theys and thems. Don't always use he's and hers. That's another very easy way, actually, of depicting gender diversity. Is just diversifying your pronouns. What are some other sort of higher level cultural things that we can do with gender and sexuality? Could maybe explore how how different cultures view gender roles differently, and how let me put this. Have different cultures view gender and sexuality differently. And this is something that goes to one of my biggest kind of bugbears when it comes to traditional fantasy, is that basically all cultures are the same. Human culture is not that different from elf culture, is not that different from dwarf culture, is not that different from halfling culture. They're all kind of the same pastiche of patriarchal European medieval culture. Have some major differences between different cultures, not just necessarily racially based, but also geographically based. Say you have two different tribes of dwarves that live continents apart from one another, and their views on gender and sexuality are completely different. What happens when they interact with one another? That's another way of bringing in diversity and inclusivity. So long as we're doing it in a positive and respectful way. Again, I don't want you taking your player characters into a dwarven mountain fortress where all the women are dressed in armor and all the men are wearing dresses and everyone to just go ha 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 ha. That's not the point. The point is to view this respectfully and to see how these cultural and gender norms, when you start flipping them and changing them around, how they start generating interesting ideas and changing your own personal perceptions about these issues. Let's see, what else can we do on a social or cultural level, the bigger levels? Well, let's see. We could go even one further than that. We can talk about cosmology, because that's a topic that comes up a lot in especially fantasy role-playing games. The beginnings of the universe, the primordial deities that's brought forth everything. There's an opportunity for you to inject queer identity or sexuality into it. Maybe the first two gods were, in the beginning there were two deities, they were both female. And their union created the universe somehow. Let's see, what are some other larger cultural ways that we can inject these ideas and explore queerness in a thoughtful and respectful and inclusive way? Well, let's see. Oh, I've got one. We're going to go back up here to talking about characters. Don't queer code all your villains. This is a thing that has been a little bit of a bane in the fantasy community, particularly throughout like the 1980s, where villainous characters, evil characters, were heavily coded as usually homosexual, where all of the villainous men were very effeminate, all of the villainous women were very butch, and then that was counter. I'm thinking of like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe as being one of the more egregious examples, and then all of the good-coded characters, in addition to usually being white, which is, we'll come back to that another day, were always very strapping masculine men and very beautiful effeminate women. So don't queer code your villains. Gargamel, yeah. Though I will say, there's a pretty amazing video on YouTube of He-Man and Skeletor dirty dancing. It's kind of great. Do not bury your gays. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you. How could I have forgotten that one? Don't bury your gays, guys. For those of you who don't know what that means, it's basically is this very unfortunate and tired trope in a lot of media. We're still seeing it in television and movies today, where you have an established gay couple, and then one of them gets killed, and it's just it happens again and again and again, and it's just built on this sort of cultural notion that homosexuality or queerness is fundamentally linked with tragedy, and that the gay characters never seem to get a happily ever after. Buffy did it. The most recent Voltron series did this. It's not good. It's something you definitely want to avoid. I'm not saying you can never kill people who are in a same-sex relationship, or you can never kill queer characters, but don't make it a thing that has to be the case. In a lot of cases, this has been so egregious because in the particular series, there is only the one same-sex couple. They are the only representation of queerness, and then one of them gets killed off. If you have a larger, more diverse cast of characters, a world that has a bigger display of queerness, then this is a very easy trope to avoid, because if you have, let's say, 20 different queer couples representing all different spectrums and arrays of queer identity, and one of those 20 get killed, then you're not really burying your gays. That, just make sure it's for an appropriate story reason, as character deaths should be, but that doesn't really count, in my opinion, because you've gone to the effort of filling this world with a diverseness. This, it's not one of two, these are the only two gay people that exist and one of them dies. That's not what we're talking about at this point, but it is something to keep in mind. Yes, Jay, welcome to the studio, but Jay says that he just watched a show that sort of did it. It was very disappointing. Let your gays be okay. Let the gays be okay. That's all we ask. All right. Let's see if there's anything else we can come up with. Spitballing ideas. Intersectionality is important. Yep. Logan, I can't promise all the gays will be okay. Logan, to your credit, if there's anyone watching this who has not seen Countless Heroes, Logan is the DM for that, and Logan has done an amazing job, along with all of the players who have helped build out the world of Vale and the story of Countless Heroes. An amazing job of representing diverse queer characters. It's, a masterful example of how this should be done in tabletop RPGs. So, yes, Logan, I know you can't promise all the gays will be okay, especially when there's a world-ending calamity on the doorstep, but I at least appreciate that you will do your best. So... cry if you want to, Logan. Not all tears are an evil. As Gandalf said. I will say all the nice things I want about you, Logan, and there's nothing you can do. Well, you can turn off the stream, I suppose. I'm going to anyway. So, we are getting close to the hour, but see if we can come up with a couple other ideas. If anyone in chat has any other suggestions of how we can bring representation and respectful diversity into our tabletop RPG games. Let's think here. Here's one, actually, that I just thought of. Create queer spaces and communities within the game world. Now, there's some discussion to be had about whether or not the fact that we live in a world that unfortunately is not as accepting as we might want it to be is the reason that queer spaces are so important in the world in which we live. I think that even if we didn't have the kind of cultural oppression that we currently have to deal with and are rapidly, thankfully, getting out from under, I think having these communal spaces would still be an important thing. People will. It's just a thing that people do. We have a tendency to flock towards people we identify with, people we have something in common with. We create things like Nerdsmith, where a bunch of nerdy people who love role-playing games and movies and all things nerdy come together to share opinions and thoughts and we create these communal spaces based on the shared aspects of our identity. So create queer spaces and communities in your game world. Have there be, pride parades. Have there be gay coffee shops. Have there be bookstores. Make sure that if you have an erotica section in your bookstore, make sure it's well represented all the way around. But have there be drag shows. Drag shows are fantastic and one of the most amazing parts of the queer community. But have there be drag shows in your world. And have them be the campy, glorious mess that drag shows are in the real world. Just find all those wonderful, wonderful, glittery, colorful aspects of the gay community and replicate them in your world. I think that's fantastic. So, on that, because we are just about 10 minutes to 7, I'm going to start wrapping things up. Thank you, everybody who was joining me in chat today. I really do appreciate all of your contributions and your ideas as we discussed this issue. Before I go, I want to remind everyone that you should check out our World Anvil page, which is titled Homebrew Studiopolis. We'll put a link to it in chat. You can find almost everything we create on stream there for use in your own games and for further inspiration. We are very lucky to have World Anvil as a sponsor of the Nerdsmith Network. Please check them out, worldanvil.com. World Anvil is the most robust world creation tool on the interwebs, whether you are homebrewing an RPG setting or creating a world for your novel or other work. You can get a free World Anvil account. It's absolutely free to sign up, and you get pretty much all of the features. If you want a few extra special features, you can upgrade to a paid subscription as well. It's very much worth it if you ask me, especially because of World Anvil's new Heroes feature, which is going to be rolling out to the public this week. It's a brand new way for your players to interact with their characters and the game world. You've got to check it out. In fact, the stream directly before this one, Discover RPG, which is another show that runs every Wednesday here on twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith, was their show today was all about World Anvil Heroes. So go check out that VOD after this if you want to know more. I also have to thank our sponsor, Die Hard Dice. You can get 15% off your order of beautiful handcrafted custom metal dice by going to dieharddice.com and using the code HOMEBREW, it's one word. Now is the perfect time to use that promo code actually because Die Hard Dice just rolled out their newest item, the Scroll of Rolling, which is a portable dice holder and rolling surface all in one beautiful, elegant package. You can check that out right now at dieharddice.com, and remember to use the code HOMEBREW, one word, for 15% off your first or next order. If you want to find more of me, you can find me on Twitter at Matthew A. Siebert. You can also look for the Land Above podcast, which is a Dungeons & Dragons homebrew podcast that I DM. You can find that on nerdsmith.org. Going to the content tab, or you can subscribe to the Land Above podcast on iTunes or your pod player of choice. We are just about to wrap up the first arc of the Land Above podcast, so things are particularly tense right now. Go listen to it, episodes 1 through 11 now if you want to get caught up, and then episode 12 will be out next week. It's going to be ridiculous, so I hope you will listen and enjoy. For the Homebrew Studio, we will be back the same time next week, 5 p.m. UPS Pacific? No, 5 p.m. US Pacific on twitch.tv/wearenerdsmith. Until then, you can think about what we've created today on stream. Give us your feedback. Give us your thoughts. You can join the Nerdsmith Discord by clicking the link just below the Twitch player. Join the Homebrew Studio channel and let us know anything you think, any ideas you have, questions, your own variations on things we've worked on in the past. The show is, after all, about us working together, flexing those creative muscles to both teach and learn. That's what the Homebrew Studio is for. So, coming up next on the channel, we have Countless Heroes, our West Marches style D&D stream, which is DM'd by Logan. It features a revolving cast of 16 players. That's tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific, just about an hour from now. We are, I believe, 4 sessions from the end of the campaign. So this is the final week of Countless Heroes. And as I'm saying that, I can hear Logan having a minor panic attack. So go grab your dinner and come back to see how this epic tale reaches its conclusion. But that's all for our time in the studio this week. I'll see you next time. Take care, my friends.